The mountain had swallowed him whole 300 years ago, and for 300 years Kael Vashtor had known nothing but the cold silence of stone. He remembered the final battle in fragments, the taste of ash, the weight of 1,000 spears, and the sound of her voice calling his name before the world went dark. That voice had haunted him through every century of his imprisonment, a single thread of warmth in an eternity of frost. When the seal finally cracked, it was not because of some great hero's blade or a righteous army's chant. It was a child no older than 10 who had stumbled into the ruined temple while chasing a stray cat. She had touched the ancient rune out of curiosity, the way children touch things they don't understand, and the magic that had held him bound simply let go. Perhaps the spell had weakened with time, perhaps it had never been meant to last forever. Kael would never know for certain, and in the end, it didn't matter. He rose from the stone slab like a man waking from a long illness, his limbs unfamiliar, his black horns catching the thin light that filtered through the cracked ceiling. The girl screamed and ran as any sensible child would upon seeing a demon lord unfold himself from a tomb. He did not chase her. He had no interest in terrorizing villages anymore, not after everything he had lost. The world outside the temple had changed beyond recognition. Where once there had been battlefields soaked in blood, now there were quiet farmlands and winding roads lined with autumn trees. The war that had defined his existence, demons against humans, chaos against order, had ended long ago, though not in the way he might have expected. There had been no final victory for either side. Instead, exhaustion had settled over both races like a shared grief, and eventually an uneasy peace had taken root. Kael walked through villages that no longer feared his kind, though they still eyed him with caution. Demons lived among humans now, not as equals exactly, but as neighbors who had learned to tolerate one another. He found this strange new world both fascinating and hollow. Everything he had fought for, everything he had sacrificed, had been rendered obsolete by the simple passage of time. It was in a small town called Ashford that he first heard her name again, not the woman who had haunted his memories, for she had died centuries ago, a footnote in the history books that spoke of the Demon Lord's War. No, this was a different name entirely, one that struck him with unexpected force. Elara Whitmore, a healer known throughout the region for her gentle hands and her refusal to turn away anyone in need, regardless of their bloodline. He told himself he sought her out merely for information about this new world, nothing more. The tavern keeper who mentioned her name had spoken with such reverence that Kael's curiosity had been genuinely piqued, but as he made his way toward her cottage at the edge of town, something in his chest tightened in a way he hadn't felt in 300 years, not since the war, not since he had lost everything that had once made him feel alive. Her cottage was modest, surrounded by herb gardens that grew in careful rows despite the encroaching autumn chill. Smoke curled from the chimney, and through the window he could see her moving about, a woman with dark hair pulled back in a practical braid, her sleeves rolled up as she worked at a wooden table covered in dried plants and small glass vials. He knocked, and when she opened the door, their eyes met, and for a moment the entire world seemed to hold its breath. She did not scream. She did not flinch at his horns or the crimson glow that sometimes flickered in his eyes when his emotions ran high. Instead, she simply looked at him with an expression of quiet curiosity, as though demons appearing at her doorstep was an unusual but not entirely unwelcome occurrence. "You're the one they found in the old temple," she said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. "The demon lord who slept for 3 centuries. "I prefer Kael," he replied, surprising himself with how easily the words came, "though I suppose demon lord has a certain dramatic flair." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Come in then, Kael. You look like you could use something warm to drink, and I imagine you have questions about the world you've woken up to." He stepped across her threshold, and something ancient and weary within him began, ever so slowly, to stir back to life. Ilara's cottage smelled of dried lavender and something earthier underneath, perhaps ginger root or crushed sage. Kael sat at her wooden table, his large frame awkward among the delicate teacups and pressed flowers, while she moved with practiced efficiency to prepare something that steamed and smelled faintly of honey. "You're not afraid of me," he observed, watching her work. "Should I be?" She set the cup before him without ceremony. "The war ended long before I was born. Whatever crimes you committed, whatever destruction you caused, it exists in history books now, not in the world I actually live in." That's a remarkably practical way to view 3 centuries of bloodshed. She sat across from him, her hazel eyes studying his face with the same clinical attention she might give a wound she was assessing. "I've treated demon soldiers and human farmers with the same hands, Kael. Blood looks the same regardless of what creature it came from. Pain feels the same too. I stopped seeing the war as a matter of sides a long time ago." Something about her directness disarmed him more thoroughly than any weapon ever had. In his 300 years of existence before his imprisonment, he had known generals and kings, warriors and sorcerers, but few people had spoken to him with such unguarded honesty. Most either groveled in fear or postured with false bravado. Elara did neither. Over the following weeks, he found himself returning to her cottage with increasing frequency. He told himself each visit was merely practical. She was, after all, his best source of information about the modern world, the shifting political landscape, the customs that had evolved in his absence. She explained how the war had ended not with a decisive battle, but with mutual exhaustion, how the human kingdoms and demon territories had slowly begun trading rather than fighting, how a generation of children had grown up never knowing true conflict between their peoples. But their conversations rarely stayed confined to practical matters. She asked him about his life before the imprisonment, and he found himself speaking of things he had not discussed with anyone in centuries. He told her about his childhood in the demon territories, about the political maneuvering that had forced him into leadership at a young age, about the weight of responsibility that had calcified into the ruthless persona history now remembered him by. "They call me a monster in the stories," he said one evening, as autumn rain drummed against her windows. "The demon lord who slaughtered entire villages, who showed no mercy to those who opposed him." "Did you?" Her question held no judgment, only genuine curiosity. "I did things I am not proud of," he admitted. "War makes monsters of everyone eventually, human and demon alike, but I did not slaughter for pleasure, whatever the stories claim. I was fighting for the survival of my people who were being pushed toward extinction by human expansion. That doesn't excuse everything I did, but it does explain it." Elara nodded slowly, absorbing this without the horror or fascination he had expected. History simplifies everything into villains and heroes. The truth is always more complicated than that. He watched her tend to her garden the following morning, her hands gentle as she worked with plants that could either heal or poison depending on how they were prepared. There was a metaphor in that, he thought, though he couldn't quite articulate what it meant. She moved through the world with such quiet purpose, helping whoever came to her door regardless of their history or bloodline, and he found himself drawn to that purpose like a moth to flame. One afternoon, a young demon boy arrived at her cottage, his arm badly burned from an accident with cooking fire. Kael watched as Elara worked with calm efficiency, murmuring soft reassurances in a voice that seemed to ease the child's pain almost as much as her salves and bandages. When the boy finally left, his mother weeping with gratitude, Elara turned to find Kael watching her with an expression he couldn't quite hide. "What?" she asked, wiping her hands on her aprons. "Nothing," he said, though it was far from nothing. He was remembering another woman centuries ago who had shown him kindness when the world had only offered him war. He had loved her fiercely, and her death had been the final blow that had led to his defeat and imprisonment. He had believed, in the darkness of his stone tomb, that he would never again feel anything resembling that connection. Yet here he was, 300 years later, feeling something dangerously similar stir within his chest as he watched a healer tend to a demon child with the same care she would show any human patient. "You have the same look my grandmother used to describe," Elara said, suddenly breaking his reverie. "She used to say that some people carry entire graveyards behind their eyes. You have that look, Kael Vashtor." "Perhaps I do," he admitted. "I lost someone long ago before the final battle before my imprisonment. Her name was Lyanna, and she believed, despite everything the war had become, that peace between our peoples was possible. She died believing that, and I have spent 3 centuries wondering if her faith was foolish or prophetic." Ilara's expression softened with something that might have been sympathy or might have been recognition. "Looking at this world now, I would say her faith was prophetic. It simply took longer than she might have hoped." That night, as he walked back toward the small dwelling he had taken on the outskirts of town, Kael found himself wondering if perhaps some doors, once closed by death and despair, could indeed open again, not by replacing what was lost, but by allowing new light to enter where darkness had settled for so long. Winter arrived in Ashford with a gentleness that surprised Kael, who remembered winters from centuries past as brutal, unforgiving seasons that had claimed countless lives during the war. This winter brought soft snowfall and the warm glow of hearth fires, and increasingly it brought him to Ilara's door not out of necessity, but out of a longing he had not permitted himself to feel in 300 years. Their relationship had shifted gradually, so slowly that Kael could not pinpoint the exact moment when casual conversation had become something deeper. He found himself anticipating her sharp wit, the way she challenged his assumptions about the modern world, the gentle teasing she employed when he grew too somber or philosophical. She in turn seemed to genuinely enjoy his company, often finding excuses to extend his visits with tea and later, simple meals shared across her wooden table. But not everyone in Ashford shared Ilara's easy acceptance of the awakened demon lord. Whispers followed Kael through the village streets, and one particularly cold morning, those whispers found voice in the form of Marcus Aldrich, a former soldier who had lost his brother during the war's final years. "You dare walk among us as though you belong here," Marcus spat, blocking Kael's path as he made his way toward Ilara's cottage. A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the confrontation, their expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. "My brother died fighting your armies, bled out in a field while you sat safely behind your soldiers, commanding others to die for your ambitions." Kael felt the old anger stir within him, the defensive fury that had once made him a terror on the battlefield. 300 years ago, he might have struck the man down without hesitation, might have reminded this insolent human of exactly what a demon lord was capable of. But 300 years had taught him something about the weight of grief and about the futility of meeting anger with more anger. "I am sorry for your brother's death," he said instead, his voice carrying a quiet sincerity that seemed to surprise the gathering crowd. "War took much from everyone, human and demon alike. I cannot undo what happened, and I would not insult his memory by pretending my hands are clean of the blood spilled during those years. But I did not come to Ashford to relive that war. I came because this era offers something the war never could, the possibility of something better." "Pretty words from a monster," Marcus sneered, though his conviction seemed to waver slightly. "Perhaps," Kael acknowledged, "but even monsters can recognize when the world has moved beyond the darkness that created them. I have no wish to fight you, Marcus Aldrich. I understand your pain, even if you cannot understand my regret." The confrontation might have escalated further if Elara had not arrived at that moment, drawn by the commotion outside her cottage. She pushed through the crowd without hesitation, positioning herself between the two men with the fearless authority of someone accustomed to handling volatile situations. Marcus, your daughter's fever broke 3 days ago because of remedies this man helped me gather from the eastern forests, she said firmly. Whatever your grievances with the war, they have nothing to do with the man standing before you today. The revelation seemed to catch Marcus off guard, his anger faltering as he processed this unexpected information. Kael had, in fact, spent several afternoons helping Elara collect rare herbs that grew only in demon territories, using his knowledge of those lands to help her expand her healing capabilities. He had not mentioned this to anyone, viewing it simply as a way to spend more time in her company. The crowd slowly dispersed, though Marcus lingered for a moment longer, his expression conflicted. "This doesn't mean I forgive what happened," he finally muttered. "No one is asking you to forget or forgive instantly," Kael replied, "only to consider that perhaps not every demon deserves to be judged solely by the actions of a war that ended long ago." That evening, sitting once again at Elara's table, Kael found himself unusually quiet, the confrontation having stirred memories he had long tried to suppress. Elara seemed to sense his mood, setting aside her usual directness in favor of a gentler approach. "You handled that better than I expected," she said softly. "I have had 300 years to think about the war," he replied. "About what I could have done differently, about the lives lost on both sides that might have been saved if pride and fear hadn't driven us all towards such destruction. Marcus's anger is justified, even if it's misdirected toward me personally." "Hannah," Elara said suddenly, causing him to look up in surprise. "You mentioned her name before, the woman you lost. Do you think she would recognize the world we live in now?" Kael considered this question carefully. "I think she would be pleased, though perhaps not entirely surprised. She always believed that peace was inevitable, that the war was simply humanity and demonkind taking the long way toward a truth that should have been obvious from the beginning, that we are not so different from each other, despite our physical forms." "And do you believe that now, after everything you've seen since waking?" He met her eyes across the table, feeling something shift within his chest, something that had been frozen for 3 centuries finally beginning to thaw. "I am beginning to believe many things I once thought impossible." The unspoken meaning behind his words hung in the air between them, charged with possibility. Ilara's cheeks flushed slightly, though she did not look away. "Kael," she said softly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "Always," he replied. "When you look at me, do you see Elara, or do you see a reflection of the woman you lost? I need to know if I am simply filling a void left by her absence, or if what exists between us is something new entirely." The question struck him with unexpected force, forcing him to examine his own heart with brutal honesty. He thought of Lyanna, of the love they had shared during a time of war and desperation, a love that had been beautiful but also shaped entirely by the circumstances of conflict and loss. Then he thought of Elara, of her fierce independence, her practical wisdom, her ability to see him not as a monster or a legend, but simply as a person navigating an unfamiliar world. "You are entirely your own person," he said finally, his voice steady with conviction. "Lyanna existed in a different lifetime, shaped by different circumstances. What I feel for you has grown from getting to know you specifically, your kindness that never asks for anything in return, your courage in defending a demon against an angry mob, your ability to make me laugh for the first time in 300 years. This is not a reflection of my past. This is something entirely new, born from who you are, not who she was." Ilara's eyes glistened with unshed tears, though her smile was radiant. "Good," she whispered. because I think I am falling in love with you, Kael Vashtor, demon lord or not, and I needed to know that what I feel is real, not simply gratitude or curiosity." He reached across the table, his large hand covering hers with surprising gentleness. "It is entirely real," he assured her, "as real as anything I have ever known." Spring came to Ashford with an explosion of colour, wildflowers carpeting the meadows that surrounded the small town, and Kael found himself marvelling at how thoroughly his existence had transformed since his awakening the previous autumn. The demon lord who had once commanded armies and struck fear into the hearts of humans now spent his mornings helping Elara tend her garden, his afternoons assisting villagers who had gradually warmed to his presence, and his evenings in quiet conversation with the woman who had somehow managed to thaw 3 centuries of accumulated grief and isolation. Their courtship had not been without challenges. Word of the demon lord's awakening had eventually reached both human and demon territories beyond Ashford, drawing attention from various factions still nursing old grudges or harboring ambitions related to his considerable power. Some demons had traveled to the village hoping to rally him toward reclaiming his former glory, urging him to reassert dominance over territories that had grown complacent during his long absence. Kael had refused each overture with quiet firmness, explaining that he had no interest in reviving conflicts that had already cost too much. More troubling had been the arrival of a delegation from the Human Council concerned representatives who worried that his presence in a small village represented a potential threat to the fragile peace that had taken centuries to establish. Kael had met with them personally, and Elara had stood beside him throughout the tense negotiations, her presence somehow lending credibility to his assurances that he sought only to live quietly, without ambition for power or conquest. "I have seen what war costs," he had told the council representatives, his voice carrying the weight of genuine conviction. "I have paid that price myself, losing 3 centuries of existence to a conflict that ultimately resolved itself through patience and mutual exhaustion rather than victory for either side. I have no desire to return to that darkness, not when I have finally found something worth protecting through peace rather than through the sword." The council had eventually departed, satisfied that the ancient demon lord posed no immediate threat, though they promised to monitor the situation carefully. Marcus Aldrich, surprisingly, had spoken in Kael's defense during a subsequent town meeting, acknowledging that whatever the demon had been during the war, the person living among them now seemed genuinely committed to peaceful coexistence. As spring blossomed into early summer, Kael found himself standing once again in Elara's garden, watching her tend to plants that would eventually become remedies for whatever ailments the village might face. The scene felt achingly domestic, a far cry from the battlefields and political machinations that had once defined his existence. "I have been thinking," he said, drawing her attention from the herbs she was carefully pruning. "That sounds dangerous," she teased, brushing dirt from her hands as she straightened to face him. "About permanence," he continued, his usual confidence wavering slightly as nervousness crept into his voice, an emotion he had not experienced even during the height of the war, when facing armies had never caused him such trepidation. "About the fact that I have lived for centuries and demons age far more slowly than humans. I have already lost one love to circumstances beyond my control, and I find myself terrified of the eventual loss that time will inevitably bring to whatever we build together." Ilara's expression softened with understanding. "Are you asking me to promise you eternity, Kael? Because I cannot make that promise. I am human, and my years, however many they might be, will always be finite compared to yours." I am not asking for eternity, he clarified, reaching into the pocket of his coat to withdraw a small object he had spent weeks preparing, a ring crafted from moonstone and silver, infused with protective magic that had taken considerable effort to perfect. I am asking for whatever time we do have, however long or short that might prove to be. I would rather have decades with you filled with genuine love and connection than centuries of solitude protected from the pain of eventual loss. He knelt before her, the ring held carefully in his palm. Elara Whitmore, you have given me something I believed impossible after Lyanna's death, a second chance at love, a reason to embrace this new world rather than simply enduring it. I am not asking you to replace what I lost, nor am I trying to recreate a past that no longer exists. I am asking you to build something entirely new with me for however many years fate allows us. Tears streamed freely down Elara's face as she knelt to meet him at eye level, her hands cupping his face with the same gentleness she showed every patient who came to her door. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Kael Vashtor, I will spend whatever years I have loving you, building this new life together, showing this world that healing and connection can bridge even the deepest divides created by war and loss. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Kael felt something within him settle into place, a peace he had not known was possible after the devastating loss of Lyanna and the crushing weight of 3 centuries spent as history's monster. He had awakened into a world that had moved beyond the conflicts that once defined his existence, and in that unfamiliar landscape he had found not just acceptance, but genuine love. Their wedding, held in early autumn beneath the same trees that had witnessed his awakening a year prior, drew an unexpected gathering of both humans and demons from across the region. Marcus Aldrich attended, his presence a testament to how thoroughly perspectives could shift when given sufficient time and genuine effort toward understanding. The demon child Elara had once treated for burns came as well, now fully healed, his mother weeping happy tears as she watched the ceremony unfold. Standing before the assembled guests, exchanging vows with the woman who had taught him that love could indeed bloom again even after centuries of isolation and grief, Kael Vashtor understood finally what Lyanna had always believed, that the long, difficult path toward peace and understanding between different peoples was not just possible, but inevitable, given enough patience and genuine will toward connection rather than conflict. He had been given something rare and precious, a second chance at love in a world that had learned slowly and imperfectly how to heal from the wounds of war. And as he looked into Elara's eyes, watching her smile with the particular radiance of someone fully present in a moment of genuine happiness, he knew that this chance, however it might eventually end, was worth treasuring with every remaining year of his considerably long existence. The demon lord who had once been feared throughout the land had found, in the most unexpected of circumstances, exactly what he had believed lost forever, not just love, but genuine belonging in a world that continued slowly but surely to prove that redemption and connection remained possible, even for those who carried the heaviest of histories behind their eyes.